We're joined from Cairo by journalist and researcher Mr. Ihab Omar. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Omar, and welcome to Qnews. Let me start by asking you, how might repeated Israeli strikes on shelters impact civilians' trusts in any future ceasefire or humanitarian arrangements?
Greetings to you, viewers. Thank you so much for having me. Now we're about to see finally real features for a truce agreement in the Gaza Strip. This must have been a ceasefire agreement, not a truce, because the truce means implicitly that the war might be resumed after, and there has been no truce throughout history where the war was not resumed after. So it's better to agree on ending the war or an end to the fight and not a truce. But regardless of the terminology, the reading of Trump and Netanyahu to the Gaza war has proven that war is a failure and Israel will be unable to continue. And now we see a victory for the Egyptian vision that a ceasefire is inevitable, and even if the truce is only for 60 days, this is victory for the Palestinian people and for their resistance. And the negotiation tables now has no more of the demonic Trump's vision of displacing the Gazan population from the Strip. And even if it's a temporary truce, it's a partial and tactical victory for the Palestinian people and the Palestinian question, as well as the Egyptian vision and role in the Middle East, to prevent the displacement and prevent the liquidation of the Palestinian cause.
Now, Mr. Omar, what could be the potential risks, or are we speaking here about advantages, for Hamas in agreeing to a staggered detainee exchange under the US-backed proposal?
To my estimate, Israel was trying to liquidate or neutralize Hamas completely in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas is no longer able to govern the Strip, and they are no longer as influential in the second day to the war stage or even in the truce phase. So it's a real victory or gain for the Palestinian people, and the Hamas movement is going through its worst phase, and I don't see any gains for Hamas following any type of agreement, because Hamas no longer has anything to lose. All the civil and military leaders of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip were assassinated, and it's enough to say that there is no unified military leadership for Hamas at the moment, but the affiliated militias and military task forces have taken orders that each leader of each task force is now responsible for their own teams, and they are not able to communicate with the other teams because there are no plans for coordination. Hamas has turned into military militias in the Gaza Strip without unified leadership, politically, militarily, or civilly. And to my estimate, this is the defeat of Hamas, and Israel has already succeeded in eliminating Hamas's influence in Gaza.
Now, President Trump gave Hamas 24 hours for response. Now, what does this indicate about the US leverage in those talks?
It means that the US president is aware of what I just mentioned. Hamas no longer has unified leadership or ability or strategy or even a plan. And 24 hours is even too much for Hamas to respond. He's actually directing this speech to the Hamas leadership outside of the Gaza Strip, and these are the one who's going to give the orders to the leaders of the militias inside Gaza to comply with the U.S. initiative that is being marketed as Israeli-U.S., but in my opinion it is only American, and it is all in compliance with the with the Egyptian vision proposed last January. But President Trump had different vision to evacuate the Gaza Strip and displace the population, but now he's aware that this is completely unreasonable, and only the Egyptian plan is the way forward.
We would like to pinpoint our fingers on one thing you said about the leaders of Hamas outside the Palestinian territories, but let me here also ask you about the legal obligations Israel have under international law when it targets areas known to shelter displaced civilians.
Unfortunately, the United States of America and the entire West provide complete immunity to Israel from any legal or ethical commitments. Israel, of course, is criminal, and they are completely mistaken, and they should have been held accountable since 1948. We're talking about 80 years of crimes, but the European Union and the United States and the UK provide this cover, this international Western cover, so that they are never held accountable, and they always get impunity from international resolutions.
If I may ask you here, do you think the high civilian death toll would shape regional and global responses to future the future of Gaza and the reconstruction of it and aid efforts?
The West in general always claims certain humanitarian values, but now they are ignoring these values. So it was enough for very few citizens to fall dead, injured or killed in Gaza for them to respond. But now we're talking about tens of thousands of martyrs and 50,000 missing, most probably under the rubble. And when we see the reconstruction efforts, we might see 250,000 Palestinians dead. That's the minimum death toll of this war. But the West does not really pay a lot of attention to the figures. Only they are now unable, and the Egyptian vision, of course, was the only way forward for the West and for Israel to end this military operation.
Right. From Cairo, that was journalist and researcher Mr. Ihab Omar. We thank you so much for joining us on Q News.